If we try to isolate a single moment of our lives, it slips away. The future is not yet here, the past is already gone, and the present vanishes the instant we acknowledge it. In the 4th century, Augustine of Hippo framed this as an unresolvable tension between the mind and time. He observed that our lived experience is deeply discordant. We are stretched between our memory of what was and our expectation of what will be, leaving our actual present as a continuous dissolving of experience. Yet we do not speak or act as if our lives are a blur of dissolving moments. We possess a constant drive to impose logic, borders, and meaning onto the events that happen to us. The classical tool for imposing this order is what Aristotle called mythos, or plot. A plot takes random, disconnected incidents and binds them into a structured, logical sequence with a clear beginning, middle, and end. For centuries, these two ideas existed in isolation. You had Augustine's chaos of lived time on one side, and Aristotle's neat, constructed logic of narrative on the other. In his 1983 work, Time and Narrative, the French philosopher Paul Ricoeur proposed a mechanism to reconcile this gap. He argued that time becomes recognizable as human time only when it is organized in the manner of a narrative. Conversely, a narrative achieves its full meaning only when it becomes a condition of our temporal existence. Ricoeur frames storytelling as an ontological necessity, the specific tool we use to survive and navigate the chaos of time itself. To cross the abyss between lived time and textual plot, Ricoeur constructed an architectural framework, the Threefold Mimesis. In this context, mimesis is the active imitation and representation of human action. The foundation is Mimesis 1, or prefiguration. This represents the raw, unstructured baseline of everyday human action, before any story is told. From that baseline, we move up to Mimesis 2, or configuration. This is the realm of the text, where the active implotment synthesizes those raw actions into a structured narrative. Finally, the structure returns to reality through Mimesis 3, or refiguration. This is the point where the reader receives the structured story and uses it to alter their own perception of time. This specific tripartite architecture provides the mechanism for translating raw experience into intelligible history. To understand how this works, we have to look closely at the baseline, Mimesis 1. A narrative cannot emerge from a vacuum. To imitate action, the storyteller and the audience must already share a practical pre-understanding of what human action is. Ricoeur points out that we inherently grasp the semantics of action. We know how to identify agents who act, we recognize the motives that explain why they act, and we anticipate the goals they are trying to achieve. We possess this conceptual network long before we ever read a text. It is the basic operating system of our daily interactions. Furthermore, this action is never isolated. It is governed by the symbolics of action, the cultural signs, rules, and norms that give our deeds specific context within a society. But the most critical component of this baseline is its implicit temporality. In our practical, everyday lives, we do not experience time as a series of abstract, mathematically precise clock ticks. To explain this, Ricoeur draws on Martin Heidegger and his concept of within-timeness. Within-timeness is the time of preoccupation. It is the lived experience of having the time to do something, or losing time. It is measured not by seconds, but by the tasks and rhythms of our environment, the time of works and days. Mimesis 1 provides this pre-narrative temporal structure. It is the lived bedrock that formal storytelling must graft itself onto if it wants to be understood. Once that bedrock is established, we move up the architectural arc to the apex node, Mimesis 2. This node represents the text itself, driven by the active mechanism of implotment. Look at this linear timeline. There is a common assumption that a narrative is simply an episodic sequence of events, a chronological string of this happened and then this happened. Ricoeur rejects this sequential view. He defines implotment as this interconnected web, which pulls disparate agents, circumstances, and shared chance into a single synthesis. He calls this process discordant concordance. Discordant concordance is the act of taking unpredictable, contradictory events, the discordance of lived time, and forcing them into a cohesive, logical structure, the concordance of the plot. This structure generates what Ricoeur calls the followability of a story. Followability alters how we process time. When we follow a story, we are not just moving forward, we are learning to read time backwards. In Mimesis 2, the conclusion of the plot reaches back and dictates the meaning of the initial conditions that started it. The ending makes the chaotic beginning look inevitable. Mimesis 2 is the translation mechanism that synthesizes meaningless episodic chaos into a logical, constructed reality that we can comprehend. But the process does not stop at the text. We must trace the descending architectural arc down to the final stage, Mimesis 3, or refiguration. A configured text remains dormant until it enters the active field of communication. Here, in the diagram, Mimesis 3 is the intersection point where the constructed world of the text collides with the actual world of the reader. To understand how this collision changes us, think of a painter who uses a limited palette to condense a vast landscape into a single canvas. The painting is a condensed version of reality. It abbreviates and saturates the scene until the essential details stand out. Ricoeur calls this iconic augmentation. By using plot to condense years of action into a few hundred pages, the text creates a version of reality that is denser and more readable than the one we live in. It intensifies our world rather than just copying it. The reader absorbs this configured time of the plot and uses that framework to actively reevaluate their own discordant temporal experience. The purpose of the text is to alter the practical reality of the person reading it. If we observe the entire architecture, from the prefigured action of M1 through the textual configuration of M2 to the refigured reception of M3, we see a complete system. But this system immediately faces a strict epistemological objection, the accusation that it is a vicious circle. Looking at this closed loop, critics ask, if narrative draws from our lived experience, and then we use that narrative to understand our lived experience, aren't we just repeating the same loop? Ricoeur defends the model as a healthy circle, a concept known as the hermeneutic circle. The healthy nature of the circle comes from the active invention in Mimesis 2. Because the act of implotment structures and deviates from raw chronology, the world experienced by the reader is never identical to the one the author started with. This constant injection of new configurations creates a dynamic, escalating feedback loop. The world the reader returns to is more structured and meaningful than the world they inhabited before engaging with the text. By passing our raw experiences through the textual configuration of history and fiction, we build our very capacity to experience time.